Well, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate you making time. If you were with us at AbSciCon, thanks for bearing with us and coming back again to hear some more about the Life Detection Forum project. If you're new to it, thanks so much for taking the time and coming to learn a little bit about this. So let me start sharing my screen. There we go. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about the Life Detection Forum project, the motivation and the rationale behind it. And then talk about a series of workshops that we want to run virtually over the next couple of months to walk through this project in a systematic way. So this turns out to be a great time to talk about life detection. As many of you know, the Mars 2020 rover Perseverance launched successfully this morning, so it's on its way to Mars now. And really, that's what I see this entire project and exercise as being about. It's finding ways to work together as a community to bring life detection objectives into the mainstream of planetary sciences and astronomy, and more specifically onto missions that seek evidence of life beyond Earth. So it's a great day to launch things, and so let's launch the Life Detection Forum project. A lot of this, I think, boils down to a need for standardization in life detection. So if you think about the range of potential measurement strategies that could be brought to bear in addressing life detection objectives, it's large, it's diverse, and in most cases, it's quite novel relative to the methods that are traditionally used in planetary sciences. And very often, the language and the standards that are used to demonstrate the value or the utility of a particular life detection approach are also variable, and in often cases, particular to a given approach. And so this has the problem that you've got this very large, complex, apples to oranges comparison on possible measurement strategies. And I think this can create a barrier to the integration of life detection objectives into missions, because it's difficult to conceive of bringing to bear a measurement approach if you don't truly understand it in concept and implementation and haven't been able to compare it against alternative strategies. So we, in the Enfold white paper that some of you contributed to, and I hope many of you have read, actually tried to address this need for standardization. So we said that to advance toward life detection requires meaningful integration of astrobiology objectives and expertise and measurement technology. And in order to do this, NASA should engage the astrobiology science and technology communities in doing two things. So one is to develop a standard framework in which the traceability of specific measurements to specific life detection objectives can be assessed relative to a set of uniformly and universally applied criteria. And the other is to develop a curated set of reference materials that provide a common basis for demonstrating instrument performance with respect to life detection objectives, rather than a self-defined basis. And we want to be able to tackle both of these things in Enfold, working together with you, the community. This project, the Life Detection Forum project, is really about the first of these. And the first recommendation actually echoes something that the National Academies suggested in the Search for Life in the Universe Astrobiology Strategy report. So they said NASA should support the community in developing a comprehensive framework for assessment, including the potential for biosignatures, false positives, and false negatives, to guide testing and evaluation of in situ and remote biosignatures. And really the operative words from the standpoint of today's talk are that NASA should support the community. So the community is you, and NASA's support is coming in the form of the Life Detection Forum project. So NASA has supported a group of Ames and Goddard scientists called Center for Life Detection to catalyze this dialogue that's necessary to develop this comprehensive framework. And that catalysis is the Life Detection Forum project. I also think framework is important terminology in the National Academies statement, because framework can be both conceptual and functional. And so the way we're approaching the Life Detection Forum project is to first catalyze the community level dialogue that's needed to develop a conceptual framework. But then we think that we can use that conceptual framework as the basis for building a functional platform, a platform that serves to standardize and centralize the exchange of information and ideas and knowledge surrounding life detection science and technology as the field evolves. And so that's what the project is really all about. So what's useful about this? I think that a well-designed and well-utilized Life Detection Forum project can help us to promote the better integration of life detection objectives into program and mission planning and implementation, And really, to me, the operative words are well designed and well utilized. So we want to make sure that we work together with the community now to decide something that is useful for as many people and as many different applications as possible. And I think that will support its utilization. And this, I think, will be something that gains from its own momentum. The more heavily utilized it is, the more of a valuable resource it becomes. So what do I think we can do if we do a good job in designing and building this platform? Ideally, I think it would become a sort of a go-to informational resource that supports program and mission planning, but also basic research and instrument development and education. I think it can be a way of identifying knowledge gaps. So if we build a system that enables us to compare promising new approaches in life detection with state-of-the-art in measurement capability, we can identify places where new research and new technology development would be very valuable in moving the life detection endeavor forward. So that's a way to justify new efforts. And I think it's a way to standardize the way that new information is sought when we propose and develop candidate biosignature measurements. Finally, I think it provides instant context, or I hope it will provide instant context for new research results and emerging measurement capabilities, exactly because it's meant to be a systematic way of establishing traceability from measurement approaches to specific life detection objectives. And so that context is there as we, the field, move forward. So what would be the desirable characteristics in a functional platform? I think that an effort to build such a platform starts with defining what you'd like to see in it. I think, and I'd like to hear what others think as well, that a well-designed platform should ideally support multiple things. First, it should support multiple uses, so use in program planning, but also as an informational resource in science definition. It can support RNA and technology development by identifying places where new research and new technology development should be prioritized. And I also think it can serve a purpose in education and actually has begun to do so a little bit. I think very importantly, there should be clear traceability of any high-level summary or evaluative content to the complete body of knowledge that underlies it. So complete body of knowledge means, for example, the peer-reviewed literature. And I think a system that will help us compile and organize this literature in a way that supports traceability between measurement requirements and life detection objectives will be very helpful. I also think it really matters that we be able to document the community commentary upon that body of knowledge. So people will interpret papers to bear on life detection objectives in certain ways. I think it matters for every voice to be heard in assessing whether they agree with that interpretation. And so a system that is able to both organize information but capture a debate upon that information is important. It's really critical that it be able to encompass user-contributed content. So the system that we have in mind is really meant to be a community-level system and a community-contributed system. If we have that level of usership, that will make it a really valuable resource. And as well, it should have the flexibility to incorporate new information as life detection knowledge and measurement technology evolves. So in other words, the field is moving. We want to make sure that we design a living system that can move with it and track that development. It needs to be able to support ready comparison between measurement requirements and existing and emerging measurement technologies and capabilities. So we'd like to be able to look at a promising measurement approach and ask what technology is there in existence that might be able to get at it, and where new technology development might be needed. And finally, I think it would be valuable for this system to allow for a process of evaluation of potential biosignatures by a uniformly applied criteria. So whether and how that evaluation happens is something that we as a community need to discuss before we consider implementing in the system. But designing a system that has that in mind from the outset at least allows for that possibility as we move forward. So how have we taken initial steps in the Life Detection Forum project? We started by trying to envision a functional system that encompasses all of the features that I just mentioned, and then break that system down into individual components and topics where we feel like community dialogue and interaction is important to make sure that it's done in the right way. So first and foremost is just to have everyone weigh in on and debate the basic organizing principle for the system. So this, in my mind, means a discussion to help develop criteria that can be uniformly applied across different potential biosignatures. We need to find a way to define those potential biosignatures at an appropriate and equivalent level of granularity so that we can think of them in apples to apples terms. And finally, to consider how we account for the environment, because ultimately we're talking about measurements that will be deployed in a diversity of environments that impact how we think of them and how we interpret them. We should have a discussion about how to put together a functional biosignature knowledge base, so something that contains all of the information and sorts all of the information we think is relevant to bear on the field and captures the community debate upon that knowledge. And the same thing for a counterpart in measurement technology. And finally, we need to think about how to integrate those various components and put an overlaying functionality on top of the whole system. So we've broken it down into those topics and then worked individually or internally within the Center for Life Detection to propose draft approaches to them. So what do we think would be a useful way forward? And the point in doing this is, I think it's always easier to organize a discussion around a straw version of something, a notional version of something, because it gives you a starting point and it gives you a basis for pointing out, this is what works about it. This doesn't work about it. And so we have tried to develop a series of draft approaches in each of these areas that we want to then put in front of you, the community, to initiate a dialogue. And we realize in doing that there's quite a bit already done and said in the literature in many of these areas. So we've done our best to identify places that we'd like to weigh in on. So for example, the Ladder of Life Detection paper, the special collection of papers that Nexus put out, a number of different studies from EPAG, the Roadmap to Ocean Worlds document, an existing software called the Hypothesis Browser software. All of these things are approaches that we tried to incorporate in developing the notional straw versions of things that we're going to put in front of you, the community. And the final step then is to organize topic-focused community workshops around these individual components or topics that we've described above. And the draft approaches that we're going to put in front of you are meant to be a basis for discussion, a starting point for discussion that can be modified or replaced as the community sees fit. So that leads to the virtual workshop series that I want to describe just a little bit. We imagine that the workshops are going to be organized around several key issues or elements that we feel is particularly important to have the community's thoughts on. I see those first and foremost as developing a standard set of criteria for biosignatures, defining potential biosignatures at an appropriate level of granularity or an equivalent level of granularity, talking through what the functionality of a biosignature knowledge base and a measurement technology counterpart should look like, and then talking about the overlying system integration and functionality. What do we want the entire thing to work like? So either each of these things would represent an individual standalone workshop. I think it's important to measure, to mention so that you know what you're getting into, that we view these as working workshops that will require active participation. So we'll ask you to be an active participant in dialogue because we want to hear what you have to say. I think that it's really critical to have active representation of a diversity of perspectives. And when we do that, we give ourselves the best chance of developing a system that's broadly useful and therefore well utilized. And finally, I see the workshops as a starting point, but not necessarily an endpoint in a discussion about each of these topics. So if we find that in the workshop format, we're able to reach some sort of a consensus within the group, that's great. If we're not, we can use the workshop activity to talk about what additional or follow-on activities might be needed to go into more depth in a given topic. So the first of these I want to talk about just a little bit to give you a sense of what we envision them looking like. The first of these would be on biosignature criteria. And the purpose of the workshop is to work toward community consensus on a standard set of criteria by which we can assess the utility of specific measurement approaches in achieving specific life detection objectives. I think, if I had to encourage your participation in any of these workshops, this, I believe, is the one where the community really needs to weigh in as a whole. Scientists, technologists, researchers in all areas really need to weigh in on this aspect. So reaching community consensus on criteria is a key first step, a foundational step in the Life Detection Forum project, because it serves as a basic organizing principle for the system. In the bigger picture, I think this is what we as a community really need to do to help establish clear traceability between measurement requirements and the life detection objectives they support. And if we can help to establish that traceability, we can help to support the integration of life detection objectives into planetary sciences and astronomy. The format is something that we've talked about a lot. So initially, or originally, we conceived these as being sort of intensive in-person workshops, which we clearly can't do in the present time. So we've tried to reconceive them as virtual workshops and envision what might work best. So here's what we have in mind. And this is a format that we'll try and see how it works, and if it needs to change, we can certainly do that. Initially, we envision them as being 2 one-hour virtual meetings that are spaced a week apart, and they would happen in exactly this time spot of Thursday at 10 Pacific. So the first meeting, which would be on August 13th, a couple of weeks from now, we envision as a 15 to 20-minute presentation on the proposed criteria, so the things we've worked independently to develop in draft form, some questions surrounding those criteria, and then time for general questions from the audience. And then really, I think the meat of the workshop will be to distribute participants into virtual breakout groups of about 5 to 7 people to discuss those criteria. What works about them, what doesn't work about them, are there modifications or alternatives that we need? And we think that we'd like to have these discussions led by someone who wasn't involved in the creation of the draft biosignatures, so someone who's not a CLD team member. And I think that's important because we want to have a fresh set of eyes and a fresh perspective to consider the draft as a starting point. We'd love to have an early career person serve as a rapporteur, so if that's something that you think you might be interested in doing, we'd encourage your participation. And then we would like to have 1 CLD team member present in each of the groups, just as an informational resource. So, you know, why is this way, or why did you do that way? We'd like to have a person there who can answer those questions, but otherwise leave the discussion to the folks who are seeing it fresh for the first time. So the intervening week between the 2 meetings, we envision as a time when, if needed, the breakout groups can either meet again independently or they can work asynchronously to summarize their findings and recommendations. What did they think about the draft criteria, and what changes might be needed? And then finally, the second meeting would be a chance to come back together in a plenary session and report out from the work of the individual groups. What did they find? And discuss next steps. Have we come close to a consensus view, or do we need to talk about more workshops or breaking the topic out into more detail? And that's something we would try to accomplish in the second meeting. We will ask that you do a little bit of preparation in advance because we want you to have some time to think about this topic before going into the workshop itself. So the preparation comes in a few forms. The first is that we ask that you fill out a brief questionnaire that's designed to collect a couple of bits of information. So the first is just to have a sense of who's interested in participating and whether or not they're available to do so. So this is in part so we can understand how many people to expect in the workshop and therefore how to structure it, but also to know whether there's a lot of interest that can't be accommodated in the initial workshop and whether therefore it might make sense to do a second go round. We also will ask for a little bit of basic demographic information, such as what your scientific expertise is, where you are in your career, with the idea being that we could use that information to try to create a good mix of expertise and perspectives in the breakout groups. And you can find that survey at the URL that's listed there. The second is that we put together a short primer that discusses the draft criteria that we're bringing to the table and a little bit of the rationale behind them. And then also frame some questions that we see as giving structure to the discussion that will happen during the workshop. So it's important to point out that the questions are just meant to guide the discussion a little bit. They don't need to be rigidly held to, and they don't need to be all answered. And they certainly don't need to be answered in advance of the workshop. We just put them there to get you thinking a little bit about what information we're going to try and collect during the workshop. And then finally, if you're an extra credit go-getter kind of person and haven't read the Ladder of Life Detection paper, I think that might be worth doing in advance of the workshop. So the Ladder of Life Detection, for those of you who haven't encountered it, was an earlier attempt at doing something like the standardization that we're talking about here. And I think in many ways, it offers a thoughtful treatment to some of the issues that come up when we're trying to do that. So I'd encourage those of you who haven't seen that paper to check it out. So that brings us to the end. I want to thank you very much for your interest in the project, for coming to listen today. I really, really hope that you'll participate in the virtual workshop series. If not all, then at least the ones where you feel your expertise would be particularly useful. If you have questions, please either just type them into the chat window and we'll try to address them in the way that we saw them, or raise your hand and we'll call on you and you can ask a question. So thanks so much again, and I hope to see you in our future virtual workshop series. From Keith Cowing, is this deliverable an official NASA product? So I think what we would love to do is work toward a point when we can do that, when we can have something that that we can point to as an official NASA product. I'd like to say that right now, what we're trying to do is catalyze the community dialogue that gets us to that point. So I don't think that we're there yet. I don't think that we can see it as an official NASA product yet. It's an effort by NASA to support the community in getting to that point. So, Graham, I saw a couple of other questions flash up. Do you have them, and could you read them?
So Natalie Greffenstedt has asked, is it possible to participate if we can't join the first workshop meeting?
So I think in the survey, what we'll do is assess people's availability. So we've asked, one of the questions that we've asked is this something you'd like to participate in but can't? And so if we get enough of can't because of the timing. So if we get enough of a response that that is the case, then we can look for a way to establish another of these workshops.
We also have a question from Judy, if graduate students are encouraged to participate in the workshops.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want everyone to participate in the workshops. I think it's particularly important to me that the early career community does, because this is, what we're trying to do now is establish the future that you then lead as graduate students. So, this is a bit of a long-term endeavor, and we're at the beginning of it. And if we lay the right groundwork now, then I hope that you as graduate students will be at a point in your career where you can actually take advantage of it. So absolutely, please participate. If you're interested in participating as a rapporteur in these groups, as I mentioned, please do that.
Awesome. One thing that was pointed out, those two links to the survey and the homework don't appear to be active currently. So we'll send out the actual links after this meeting when the recording is available as well.
Great, thanks.
We have a question here from Paul Mahaffey. It says, astrobiology is intended to be infused in the range of planetary missions. How do you envision the interactions with MEPEG, OPEG, and the other AGs?
So I think the way that we should pursue this is to work within this life detection community to come up with something that we all think is a valid approach for sort of standardizing the way we approach biosignatures. But then this necessarily needs to be brought out to the different AGs to get their input, because I think of there being a necessity for meeting of the minds, right? There'd be people who think in terms of what measurement approaches might make sense to pursue, but then the folks who think in terms of planetary exploration and what's needed to actually deploy things in situ. So this is a starting point that needs to eventually bring in the AGs. And if any of you are deeply associated with those AGs, I'd encourage you very much to reach out to them and point them towards this introductory webinar or the new and improved one that we'll hopefully record and post after the fact, and encourage their participation in the workshops right off the bat. All right, seems like no. Hey, thanks so much for joining us, everyone. I'm so sorry for the glitch. I did expect barking dogs, but I did not expect to lose internet during this time. So I appreciate your sticking around. Please join us and participate in the workshops. And thanks a bunch.